Oh, hi, Millie. Looking forward to having a call with you tomorrow. I'll message you later about time. Um, yeah, hi, everyone. This live is focusing on the death threshold, and I'm just going to give a quick intro as to, for those people who don't know the map of womanhood, the death threshold on the map, and then we'll go into other questions that I've received about it. So the death threshold on the map of womanhood actually sits in the center. So the map of womanhood is a spiral from birth all the way to death at the center, and all of the thresholds that we cross on our journey. The 9 sacred thresholds that Gail Burkett's book 9 Passages is about. And so, yeah, death sits right at the center. And, obviously the reason for that is because it's the ultimate rites of passage that informs all of the other rites of passage. It's the ultimate death and rebirth threshold that sits at the center and informs every single other rites of passage threshold, because it's through experiencing rites of passage that we can prepare for our own death, our conscious death at the center. So all rites of passage thresholds lead to us being able to die well for the ultimate death. So each rites of passage threshold is learning how to live and die consciously. So by learning to die and stay alive through rites of passage, through crossing thresholds, we can also then realize that what we've been doing is preparing for our actual death when we leave our physical body. So it sits at the very center. And for me, the reason why I call it a map, unlike Gail Burkett, who calls it a life spiral. Hi, Laura. Hi, Juliet. The reason why I actually call it a map is because of that evolutionary path of continuing. It is a continuing spiral, obviously, but for me, it's a map because there's also the future that is destined once we start working with this as a map of evolution. So beyond the map of womanhood is the map of soul's evolution, which is something that Hannah and I teach in our shamanic training. And it was going to be more in the second year as well, because it goes beyond the body and the path of that journey of the holy. So just to say, it's really good timing for me doing this live, because Hannah and I have just launched with the Sacred Death Centre. Hi, Willow. With the Sacred Death Centre, we're doing a sort of collaboration where we're doing a rites of passage of death and grief course, and it starts on the 11th. No, it starts on the 6th of November till the 11th of December. And because we're working with the Sacred Death Centre, the places on that course are less expensive because it's funded, which is amazing, because when we do this work, right, we want to make it accessible to as many people as possible, especially when we're working with death. So, so when we're working with death, there's lots of different layers to it. We can be talking about this to, soul midwives, death doulas, people working with conscious death, but also the grief ceremony, holy grief, and the journey of the soul. So there's like loads of different levels that I could talk to about this death center. But I'm going to go with the questions that I've had. I had a really amazing question, the first one that came up, with somebody called 36 Scars Later. So that's an epic Facebook name. So thank you for the question. And there was a lot to, I think it was what she was saying, if you're watching as well, what you were saying. about this path of like our beloveds passing over, and you know, experiencing loss and experiencing you know, how to navigate grief. So she was talking about her personal journey that she'd had with some grandparents. And so I wrote down the last bit of what she said. How can I finely tune my prayers to reach my lost loved ones more clearly? I keep being told to just pray and the words will leave me. Yet I get tongue-tied and spin in circles, which is really tender, isn't it? And yeah, I wanted to speak to this because, you know, there's a lot in it about how we can prepare for our own death and how we can help others as well. Because something that I've learned along my way is that, you know, grief. So like if we're talking about grief, grief is a spiritual awakening. You know, it's there. It's medicine. It's the doorway that it pushes us through in our hearts is holy. And so it's a spiritual awakening. You know, it's everything to us being able to have a spiritual awakening because it brings us to our knees. And it's what they call, you know, mercy. You know, it's that I've been learning something recently, loves, because I'm going on a pilgrimage to Fatima, which is one of the holy places, the Catholic holy places in Portugal. And I've been learning about Our Lady of the Sorrows. And it's about the hearts and about the 7 sacred sorrows that she experienced through loss. And the opposite of that, the 7 graces that come from those 7 sorrows. And this is my experience of grief. And so when I speak to how can I finely tune my prayers to reach my lost loved ones more clearly, is to recognize that if we do want to, say we're talking about it from the place of continuing bonds with our loved ones that have passed over, you know, we're needing to understand grief to be able to do that, because grief is, it's like the boat. The tears are the boat that carry us through the threshold of the gateway of our hearts to the other side. And so we can look at that for all thresholds along the map as well, in terms of allowing the grief of the loss of our childhood to carry us, the tears of that grief ceremony to carry us through to the new version of ourselves. So, you know, when we look at the heart as the kingdom of love, and we look at that mercy that comes from being brought to our knees, the devastation of losing somebody, feeling like you've separated from them, you know, that act of being brought to our knees helps us to rise up into the realm of the new version of the holy that sits in our hearts all of the time. And so it's the same really as like the journey of the soul. You know, death is the ultimate arriving fully into our light body, into our soul, whereas the past thresholds on the map have been us trying to express our soul. And for you, Juliet, with your question, how do we embrace ourselves as we become elders when the world keeps pushing us not to? That's the journey of like, keep on grieving, if you like, to be able to embrace ourselves as an elder, as holy, as a child of love that we are. We do need to keep grieving. And that, you know, this morning I woke up feeling in quite a lot of density because I've been doing a lot of doing. And I was like, so for me, it's like the spiritual practice that I need to do every morning to keep my heart open, because being in human form brings us those challenges of heavy energy, and mercy and loss and grief, because we have to see it as a spiritual practice, because it's the only way that we're going to make it through. Let the tears carry us, like on the boat of tears, through our hearts to the other side. And waiting on the other side is our beloveds. And we don't ever really have loss then, because we realize that our soul is always with them, because it can't not be. So yeah, in terms of like what 36 scars later we're saying, you know, how can I finely tune my prayers? It's the recognition that prayers aren't necessarily words. So when we're in grief, and what we need to do is find our way out of the density that stops our loved ones being able to find us, because they want to find us just as much as we want to be with them, because there's no separation from the place of the soul. So they haven't really gone anywhere. They're still here. They're just in another place. And that's what the Indigenous people talk about when they talk about dropping your robes. You know, they're just, or getting, it's like getting on another bus. You know, it's like you leave that behind and you're in the next place. So when we grieve well, what we're doing is we're letting go of the contraction of the loss, and we're keeping our heart open. We're allowing our heart to soften again. You know, the tears are what washes our hearts clean of the, because I'm not, you know, like pain isn't density really. Pain is to show us that there's love. Pain is there because of love. So the pain is the guiding light to show us that the love is there, and that what we need to do is cry and let our hearts soften, so that we can really feel the prayer of what our prayer is, you know. So prayer is embodied, prayer is a feeling. So when we truly feel our, and it can be excruciating when, you know, when I feel the person that I'm missing, it's it can be excruciating, because it's like, oh, you're reminded of what that person feels like. You're reminded of what that person smelt like. You're reminded of what that person's eyes looked like. And then it brings that pain even closer. But in that pain being brought close is them. And so, you know, when I talk to people who are grieving, I'm like, hold the pain close, hold the heartbreak close. It's like when we did the closing the bone ceremony for grief, it's like, you know, with the shawls, it's like you're covering the aching heart in a shroud. Because when you cover the aching heart in a shroud, what you're doing is you're holding it close. Because by holding it close, you're keeping it sacred. It's like, you know, not trying to get away from the pain and losing the feeling of belonging and togetherness. Because the more we stay close to the pain, the more we are close to our beloveds that are passed over, because it's the pain that's the separation. So keeping it close and allowing the separation, allowing the closeness to be the prayer. So continuing bonds, they call it, where you keep feeling the people, you keep behaving like they're still there. You know, you talk to them in the same way, you behave like they're still there. And in some cultures, you know, they're putting out plates of food still for their loved ones that have passed. They're still treating them like they're there. And that, to me, is the continuing bonds of keeping it all close and not trying to get away from the pain, and remembering the death, you know, because it's because we try to get away from it that we don't understand what it truly is. So yeah, when we look at prayer and holy grief, we need to remember the act of telepathy, which is just the embodiment of knowing that we're still together, and having that embodied feeling, that's the conversation, that is the prayer, knowing that they're right with you, they're inside of us, because the oneness sits inside of us. And so allowing that expansion to really be there of where they are, you know. And it's like, so if we look at it as we're working towards our own death, you know, grieving ourselves before we die, grieving all that we have to let go of, and preparing ourselves for having to let go of all of that, everything that we've built up in this life, you know, all that we've experienced, letting it all go, you know. I mean, it's deeply profound, isn't it, to grieve your life before it's, I'm not going to say over, but it's like grieving your life to make way for the expansion of yourself out of your body. So again, it comes back to the same journey at each threshold. So I want to speak a little bit to Juliet's question before I go on with all of that. Like, how do we keep embracing ourselves as we become elders when the world keeps pushing us not to? Healing towards death and life, while also healing the past and the ancestors, and reaching for the children and the grandchildren with what we have to share. So before we pass over, one of the things that we have to lay to rest is this journey of this, what she's saying, basically, like laying to rest all of the regrets and all of the distortions before you pass over. And one thing I wanted to speak to here was a ceremony that I've done, which is really, really powerful. And it's a really powerful one to do with people who are passing over, but also for, you know, for everybody, which I called the Future Ancestors Journey. So in this ceremony that I designed, what we're doing is we're doing a shamanic journey where we're seeing ourselves as the future ancestors. So what we're doing is, you know, we can go back and we can heal the past. So, you know, when I'm talking to how to prepare for your death, how to help someone to stay connected to their loved ones that have passed over, and we look at this journey of each threshold on the map, you know, we're looking at like how to navigate across through to the other side. That's like healing the past and restoring elderhood. We're like, we're going past, and I know I keep talking about this, we're going past and we're to the past, and we're picking up all of our fragmentation so that we can be fully present with the threshold we're in. So in terms of ancestors and preparing for our death, we can also go forward into the future and pick up what's destined. So we can do this future ancestors journey, for example, where what we do is we have the shamanic journey where we go forward in time, but we're holding the bundle of what our ancestors passed on. It's like passing the baton. So we're healing the distortion of our ancestors, but we're bringing through the gifts of our ancestors, and we're finding our place within that lineage, and we're bringing it forward as medicine. So what we're doing in the journey is we're doing the shamanic journey where we're projecting forward, say 7 generations into the future, and we're looking back at ourselves from the place of the ancestor. We're looking back at the medicine that we've carried through from our ancestors, and then we're making a conscious decision or a conscious moment to drop what doesn't serve this lineage going forward into the future as you as an ancestor, and putting ourselves in the place of the ancestors, and looking back and seeing the past generation looking up to us and praying to us. So in the journey, we're seeing ourselves praying to our future selves, if that makes sense. So we're imagining the next 7 generation holding a fire and drumming and singing to us as their future ancestors. So if we are the future ancestors answering the prayers of the generations below, what are those prayers that we want to hold? You know, so while they're praying to us, so you can imagine, for example, our great grandchildren praying to us as the future ancestors to guide them, to support them, to hold them. What would we want to be giving back? And when you put yourself in that place of the future ancestor, you realize the roles and responsibilities that we have to be those ancestors that they can pray to, that they can call out to for support, and what we can hold for them as the women that have carried the medicine forward. So this then takes us back to the role of the elder as we move towards death, the role of becoming the indigenous wisdom keeper for the tribe, you know. So as the fertility wanes and we go through menopause and we step into elder, we become aware that we are the last indigenous wisdom keepers in body that are holding what's necessary for life to continue to evolve as a prayer and as a ceremony. So we can do this journey, this shamanic journey, where we pick up the threads of the past and weave them into a bundle that's the present, and at the same time see ourselves marching forward through the next future 7 generation, carrying this bundle of prayers and holding it as an ancestor for them to be able to access in the afterlife, whatever word you want to use for the afterlife, because that's our legacy that we leave behind. It's this bundle of wisdom that we've continued to carry as a bundle carrier, bundle of medicine carrier, through to the point of death, and then to continue that legacy beyond death by giving those generations that are coming behind us access to that medicine bundle that we carried. And it's like that can all be done with the shamanic journey. So that's one of the ways that I embrace myself as an elder. One of the ways that I have my spiritual practice, like for example every morning, is to open my bundle and embrace myself as a future ancestor, and to know that that legacy that I'm holding by just being Eartha is going to continue through my elderhood, through my death, and then into the afterlife, and inform the conscious evolution of our species through the expansion of ourselves into the soul that we are, into the radiant light, and that's a act of reciprocity. So yeah, that's what I do actually as a spiritual practice, is that I will consciously pick up the threads of the medicine of my ancestors and drop the threads of the distortions that no longer serve me, and carry through the lineage as a bundle of medicine that's being given to the future generations. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense to what I'm speaking to. Because the other thing that goes along in those prayers is the healing of ancestral grief. So, you know, what I learned with my own grief, that I wasn't actually grieving my own grief. I was grieving ancestral grief, and it was very distorted. And I got to the point when I was grieving of having to stop myself, and because I felt like a fraud. I felt like my grief was not truthful, that I was a fraud, and that it was almost like I was having, it was a weird one because it was almost like I was having a drama. And so what I learned from that is that we've got the human self, haven't we, that experiences the devastation of death and the devastation of grief. But we've also got ourselves as a soul that's completely aware of eternal life and the spiritual awakening of what death and grief actually is. And what I realized, that for me to be able to die well and to grieve well, was to recognize what was my grief and what was ancestral grief that was not healthy, that wasn't truthful, that was distorted. You know, so if we look at ancestral grief, it could be, you know, the distortion of religion, it could be the distortion of trauma, it could be the distortion of not ever being able to grieve well. And so by reclaiming grief ceremonies and learning how to grieve well, learning about our own grief, what we're doing is we're healing ancestral trauma, we're healing ancestral grief. Because I did actually feel like a fraud. Like, that was my only feeling. I was like, this feels really untruthful, the way that I'm grieving. And it was because what I realized was that I was grieving from my like 8-year-old girl. I was grieving from my 10-year-old self, my teenage self. I was grieving fear. My grief was full of fear because my information around grief and death was given to me through my ancestors, which were chapel going, Welsh, oppressive ancestral lineage. So the grief was tinged with all sorts of different messages about, you know, insanity, you know, being locked up, you know, sectioned, becoming alcoholic. There was a lot of stuff in there that that wasn't mine. And what I needed to do was pull through. I worked hard actually to wake up every day, to go outside, make an altar, and to heal all of that fragmentation around grief, so I could get to the core of what my grief actually was, what my own expression of my grief was. And that's when I discovered continuing bonds. That's when I discovered that there's a path of grief called continuing bonds, where you continue to behave like they're still there. It's actually a thing. And that's what I realized was my truthful grief, because I could feel that he was still there. I could feel him all around me because I was aware of my soul and I was aware of his soul, and that I could recognize that. So when we go back to 36 Scars Later's question about, I keep being told to just pray and the words will leave me, yet I get tongue-tied and spin in circles. You know, it's that act of, yes, we can use words when we pray, but really it's our heart's longing that is the prayer for them to come close. Because if our heart is contracted, then what I learned is that we cannot shine our light. So grief can be really dense, meaning it stops our light from shining if it's not moved through in its waves, you know? So it's waves of contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion, that grief is like the tide. Those are the rebirthing of ourselves. So it's our heart contracting into the pain of loss and then needing to move through into the next. Yeah, grief. Yeah, Willow, grieving and feeling like a fraud, right? I felt this when my son passed over. Yeah, and it's you know, when you're grieving and you feel like you're a fraud, it can actually become, it's almost like it could become a mental health issue, because it feels so surreal. And it's that feeling as well I had of like, well, I'm grieving that they've gone, but where have they gone? It's because, and I thought there's this feeling of loss, but there was a feeling of fraud around that as well, because I was like, well, I don't actually feel like I've lost them. I don't feel like I've lost him, you know, because there's no separation. And so I had to work to lay that to rest inside of myself. Otherwise, I think it would have, there was the potential of it becoming a mental health issue. And I think that that's what has happened to my ancestors, is that it become a mental health issue because they'd never got to the core spiritual truth. So spiritual truth to me is everything, that behind everything, every tragedy, every loss, every trauma, every conditioning, every distortion is a spiritual truth that's trying to reveal itself. And when insanity comes, when pain comes, when more trauma comes, it's because the spiritual truth isn't being revealed. And the spiritual truth isn't being revealed because we're staying stuck in the contraction of our hearts. So when we go back to riding that wave of grief in the contraction, they can't see us for a start because we're so contracted in the density. They've left the density. Density is just matter. So the earth, so if we look at Pachamama, Pachamama is dense matter, right? So Pachamama is spiritual energy that's formed into matter, and heaven is spiritual energy. So the earth in her pristine state is full of spiritual energy, full of heaven, I feel, full of pristine life force, which is the life force of heaven. So in our hearts, when our heart is open and free, it's the kingdom of love. It's full of spiritual life force, spiritual truth. But we have contraction of the heart because we're living in a field of energy. Like the earth is our teaching place. We come here to experience contraction because we forget, because in the forgetting of the kingdom of love, we find our way back to the kingdom of love in a much stronger, more truthful way. So that's why we choose to incarnate in my reality, so we can be broken again. Because by being broken again, we can spiritually awaken again. Because when we get back to heaven, we're spiritually awake, and we can't we can't have those experiences because there isn't any separation, there isn't any jealousy, there isn't any grief, there's only love. So why come to earth then? It's not because we've fallen from grace, it's not because it's a sin, it's because we've come here to learn how to transform density into more love, because that's our role, I feel, as the human race, is to spiritually evolve through transforming these wounds into love, because that's what Jesus was doing, you know. And it's like he was the master of showing us how to do that. And so in our hearts is the kingdom of love. But to be able to get there, we need to ride the waves of grief, which is contraction and expansion. Contraction, expansion. What is contraction and expansion? It's birth. It's giving birth. So we're giving birth to ourselves again. I experienced going mad with grief, Julia. Exactly. Yeah, I experienced going mad with grief. It's the holy madness. You know, so that's what I want to speak to as well, is like the mind. I lost my mind when I was grieving, when I experienced death. There was no mind. I was totally lost. My mind wasn't there, and I had nowhere to go. It was either, become a alcoholic like my ancestors, or be sectioned like my grandmother, locked up, because my mind was so broken that I was going to go mad. The insanity of mercy, the insanity of holy grief. And I knew that what I needed to do was drop it down into my heart, because the no mind was the fragmenting, the dissolving of my ego, so I could be in my heart. That's what Our Lady is saying, is the Immaculate Heart. It's like, there's nowhere to go anymore because you're so broken, you're on your knees with grief, that is the moment of the opportunity of a huge growth in consciousness, by letting yourself go fully into your heart. And for those of us who don't want to experience the pain and transform it into the love that it really is, by keeping it close, by going into our heart, that's when the madness can overwhelm us. So that's why it's a spiritual awakening. If we allow ourselves to go fully into the heart and rebirth ourselves into the radiance. Yeah. Daniela, hi. What about all these poor children in Gaza? How do they choose to come back into such horror? I've been asking myself the same question, love. And, for me, this is where it comes into the awareness of the ecosystem of heaven, and how all of us are souls together as one. So it's an illusion that it's just their journey. And, that you know the poor children in Gaza, we need to recognize that they are us and we are them, and we have to grieve for that. Like, we can't do anything to help them physically, unless we're going to get on a flotilla like those incredibly brave souls have done, and travel out to those lands. But what we need to realize inside of our, like, this is what I believe, and what my healing journey with this is because it's so hard to deal with, is that, I realize that those children are me and I am them, and that my path is to feel their grief and to bring it to holy inside of myself. That's what, if you look at Our Lady of Sorrows, or Our Lady of the Immaculate Heart, that's what that teaching is that we have to feel those arrows, those knives that are in our hearts when we feel so helpless, we feel so hopeless, and we see that, is to drop to our knees and pray for mercy, not because it's outside of ourselves, but because it's within us, and that mercy will take us to the awareness of our oneness with those children. And once the human race feels their oneness with those children, how then can they commit such atrocities, commit such crimes? And that's what Jesus was trying to say. That is the moment where he sacrificed himself, took to the crucifixion, because he was trying to show us that it's all of us that are being sacrificed, and all of us that are being crucified when we commit these atrocities. It's not outside of ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves just as much as we're doing it to those children. And there's no getting out of that, So those people that are committing those atrocities directly are the ones that are going to suffer in hell, because they are going to be left with their own mind at their point of death. They're going to have they can't get away from what they've done, because it's going to be there in their consciousness at the moment of death. They will be taken to love in the end, but they're going to have to deal with what they've done, because there's no separation. They're going to feel the torment of the children that they've tormented, which is, again, the awareness of what is death. What is the journey of going through the bardos? What is the journey of liberation? What is the journey of heaven? What is the journey of a conscious death? We're faced with what we've experienced, and it's an act of love when we experience that, because our psyche will still try to resolve itself at the moment of death. Our psyche will still try to resolve all that we've experienced in our lives to be able to die well, to reach the light. So for those who've experienced such dense, who've committed such dense things and experienced such dense things, they're faced with the feelings of the people that they did that to. Like you have that experience of experiencing life through their eyes, the choices that you made, how it felt for those people, how your choices affect those people. You're put in their place, because that is how we learn and grow and resolve. So that's where spiritual forgiveness comes in. But that's an embodied practice as well, not just the words of forgiveness, which people keep saying, because we can all just say, oh yeah, I forgive you, but it's an embodied realization, otherwise it doesn't actually work. So that they're going to have to deal with that. And that's what I feel inside of myself whenever I do my spiritual practice. It's like, how have I been? What have I been doing? How has my actions affected others? And bringing that to embracing myself, Juliet, if we go back to your question, how do we embrace ourselves as we become elders or towards our death? It's like, I have to sit in the place of what I've done, what I've experienced, how I've been, and to love myself enough to heal it and to embrace it and to allow myself to learn and grow and evolve consciously, no matter how painful that is. It's my act of service and my legacy as an elder or at my death to transform it all into the new version of myself, which is, in this case, the resurrection of myself. And that's why Jesus said, forgive them, they don't know what they've done, because we don't know what we're doing. We have no idea how interwoven into the fabric of life we all are together. And that's what my book is about, the ecosystem of heaven that I'm writing with Sunheart. It's like, what is the ecosystem of heaven? It's far more than we could possibly imagine, how woven we are together. So when we feel, when 36 Scars talks about how we connect with our loved ones that pass over, we have to realize in an embodied way that they're still right there with us, by getting to know our own soul, by realizing that there's no separation, because we feel them right with us. And when we pray, it's an embodied feeling. So like when I'm praying to Sunheart, or to my dad that's passed over, what I'm doing is I'm closing my eyes and I'm remembering them to start with, remembering the love that we shared, and sometimes remembering the trauma that we shared, but like really feeling it in my heart and feeling the pain, feeling the grief fully, feeling my heart, the grief, allowing my heart to open like a doorway, feeling how painful that is, but feeling the love that is there. And then the longing that I feel becomes the embodied prayer, that they can find me, because it's emanating my light. It's not emanating the contraction of why, which is when we go back to how I felt like a fraud, was because I was like, why? And it's like, well, the why is in my heart. It's not the mind trying to work out why it happened, why it had to be so terrifying, why it was so tragic, why it was so traumatizing. It's the heart feeling the tears and the loss and the pain, and allowing those knives, like the Our Lady of the Sorrow, the arrows, to be brought to grace. Each arrow of sorrow that was in my heart was transformed to grace through the act of loving myself enough to realize that I was in the ecosystem of heaven fully with him all along, and that we are in the ecosystem of heaven with all of those souls that in Gaza, Daniela, we are. And we have to transform it for everyone else. And that's how we bring heaven to earth, is that we transform it inside of ourselves first. So I was watching, is it Greg Braden? I've never really watched people like that because I feel like it's quite heady, but it popped up on my feed and he was talking about how they'd been praying for Gaza, and then something had happened, because he talks about embodied prayer and how it not just being words, it being an embodied feeling of the ceasefire in Gaza, or the embodied feeling of rain coming to the fires, or the embodied feeling of the longing of the prayer to stay connected with your loved ones through the veil. And how he talks about the dramatic results that he's had of changing reality. And I had that with Sunheart after he passed over. When I got to the core longing, past the fraud, into the faith, even though I thought, well, even if people think I'm mad, I'm going to do it anyway, because I had faith that he hadn't left me, and that we were going to continue being together, and that my grief was my own and not anyone else's. That faith led me to the embodied feeling of, okay, we're here, we're together, and we're not separate. And then when that's when the miracles started to happen. That's when my life became miraculous, and I got the land and met Jason, and Hannah and I started having our soul path together, was because I fully stepped into the ecosystem of heaven. And my life stops when I don't remember that. And because I'm still human trying to live this life, I have to go back to the dying to remember it, because the dying is like, I think Stephen Jenkinson says, he's got some kind of like poetic phrase for it, where he says something like, making death the cradle of the love of your life. And he calls us all orphans. And he says that we're orphans because we've been left left alone on our own when it's not truthful. And by putting death as the cradle of the love of your life, I think what he means, I've never done any of his work, but I think what he means from my own embodied work with this is that whenever I lose my way and come back into the density of life, I go back to when Sunheart was in the coma, or on the beach when he was drowning, even though that sounds crazy to some people, because that is me putting death at the center of my life again, and remembering that moment of me being so broken that my ego wasn't there, and I could drop fully into my heart because it was so painful, that the pain took me deeply inside, and my ego couldn't go there. My ego, I couldn't be like, oh, I'm just gonna, because it was too excruciating. My ego couldn't run the show anymore. And so in a way, the gift of how to transform what's been happening in Gaza and other tragedies. I've been hearing all sorts of stuff going on in the Congo, and it's like we allow that, the fact that we're so broken as a human family, we're so broken as a community, as a village, as a culture, that grief of our brokenness is what's going to help us transform our world. It's not going to come from anger. It's not going to come from retaliation. It's not going to come from anything else apart from us being brought to our knees in mercy and allowing our spiritual awakening to sprout, and then to see each other through the eyes of God, and to embrace the fact that we are full of God consciousness and full of love, and so is our brothers and sisters in Gaza, so is our loved ones that have passed over, and it's all this belonging together that we need to get back to. And the more we do that inside of ourselves, the more we can transform our world, and the more we can stay connected to our beloveds. So there isn't any words when we get to that place. There is only embodiment. So this brings us back to healing the past, mending the future, clearing the ancestral wounding around all of this, and transforming the future, transforming the expansion of ourselves, the metamorphosis of ourselves at the death threshold, completely transforming the death threshold, because that's what happens. We spiritually evolve through rites of passage, and it's like that spiritual practice of healing the past, mending the future, and allowing the death threshold to then go back and inform all of the other thresholds. So when we transform the death threshold through this spiritual practice of grief, of holy grief, of realizing that the fraud, that the insanity is the path to the holy, is the path to being kissed by God, being sacrificed for the resurrection of ourselves. So when we look at every single person's death on this earth as a sacred act of sacrifice for all of us to remember who we truly are. So every time someone passes over, in however way they pass, they are sacrificing themselves for us. And our responsibility is to take that sacrifice deeply into our hearts and allow it to wake us up to the resurrection of ourselves. Because not only are our bodies an offering to Pachamama, for life to continue, literally compost for life to continue, and also for life to renew itself, because in our old age, where life needs to come back to the babies, to the spring, doesn't it? So we're letting go of ourselves so life can thrive and life can continue. On a soul level, the sacrifice of leaving our bodies and going back to heaven is so that we can take all that we've learned in this lifetime, with that sacrifice of having to leave, with us to heaven, to the afterlife, whatever words we have for this resurrection, so that evolution can happen. It's our responsibility to see each death as a gift for evolution, for expansion, and for resurrection. So I had no choice, because I loved Sunheart so much, to see his life as a gift, to see his death as a gift. Because how was I not honouring the fact that he'd left his body in the way that he did, for our children to thrive, and for life to thrive, and for life to continue in a good way? you know, and we don't know what miracles can happen when we get to that place. Because if we stay contracted in the tragedy, in the loss, in the anger, in the pain, we can't see, we can't experience the miracles that are possible when we, because contraction is just staying stuck. We can't give birth to the new version of ourselves that's going to rise up out of the ashes of death. We can't give birth to ourselves as we rise up out of the devastation. As we get a knock to our knees, we pray for mercy so we can see the light. So we can say, okay, show me the way. Why? You know, why? It's just words. That's why I felt like a fraud. I was like, okay, I'm asking this question, why? Okay, so what, this question needs to be taken into my heart. And then we can have a dialogue with our beloveds, but also what we can do is start honoring each person's death for the sacrifice that it is for life to continue, for life to thrive, and for us to spiritually evolve. And you know, why would we not want to do that? Why would we not want to take each person's life and each person's death as a precious gift to us to learn and grow and evolve? Why would we not want to love them? And that's where the act of irony, of reciprocity comes in, is that what I realized by doing that is that I'm continuing to make the ceremony of his life. I'm continuing the ceremony of his life by allowing it to support me to be the ceremony of my life. So if that makes sense, he's making a ceremony for me in the afterlife, and I'm making ceremony for him here. And together we're continuing this ceremony of life. And so when our beloveds pass over, we can think every time we make a ceremony for them, every time we make a ceremony for our own grief, what we're doing is we're continuing making offerings to a devotional offerings to the sacred that then brings it all closer, and then we move out of separation into the true spiritual truth of our oneness. And then, you know, keeping our hearts open is one of the hardest things that we can do. The amount of times I wanted to close down, even being tested in my life by, you know, being brought another beloved, you know, even like between Hannah and I as well, like the path of being twins, all of that was being tested to the point of like, how much can I bring his death into the gift of me keeping my heart open to my own life, keeping my heart open to my own sacrifice, to my own journey, to my own sacrifice. So when we look at Samadhi and Maha Samadhi, the path of like preparing for your own death, it's like, you know, I've got this going on now where I could start feeling like a fraud when I talk about Maha Samadhi, but I know I'm not, because what I'm being shown is that the heart. So if we look at the death rites, I can't speak for much longer because I need to take my daughter to the dentist, but I'm going to say, you know, when we look at the death rites in indigenous cultures, so one of the things Hannah and I will share in our online course with the Sacred Death Centre is the death rites, which is how the chakras unwind at the point of death. The last thing to release itself is the heart chakra. So when we look at Maha Samadhi and preparing for our own death, it's like the heart chakra is the last thing to unwind, right? So what I understand in myself is like, when we bring it back to the devotion I have to myself, how I can get to the point of saying, of having such a deep relationship with my heart and my spiritual heart, living from my heart, seeing the world through my soul eyes, because the seat of your soul lies in your heart. I'm so aware of my soul when I'm in my miracles. I'm living my life, walking my path of my soul. And believe me, I'm not there all the time. I have to go back into my human Eartha and flail around for a bit so I can come back to my soul again. You know, it's the amnesia. But when I feel my heart and my soul, and I feel the immensity of my soul, and I'm really in the miracles of my life, especially when I'm at my sanctuary in Portugal, because it's easier, because I'm not, you know, I'm out of the third dimension when I'm there, is the heart as the placenta of our soul. So how every experience that we have in this life is experienced in our heart. Yeah, it either becomes a contraction or expansion. So when we experience trauma, our hearts contract and we put up boundaries and we put up walls and we won't let people in. When we experience true love, our heart opens and we allow miracles to come in. That path of the heart is the path of our heart evolve, our soul being able to evolve from the experience our heart is having. So you can see it as a picture of our heart being a placenta, like a placenta that's feeding with a, you know, a silver cord, if you like, to our soul, is feeding the experience our soul's having. It's like our soul evolves and is evolving and expanding, and because our heart is learning and growing, and it's that reciprocity between our heart and our soul. And so it's, you can think of it like feeding the soul. So when it comes to the point of death, all I have to do is love myself enough that I gently tell my heart to release itself, to release that silver cord, to pull that, undo that cord that is keeping my soul tethered to my heart, and to gently guide my heart into letting go so I can release myself. And that is going to take absolute compassion and love for myself. And so this is why I am cultivating my silence. I'm cultivating my prayer so that I can dive deep into the sanctuary of my own heart and to heal any contraction in there that's going to stop me wanting to go. So any regrets, any traumas that's going to stop me loving myself enough that I can allow my heart to gently let go. Isn't it beautiful? That's what my book's about, because I'm getting all of this from my connection with Sunheart. It's like just to turn those eyes of God to yourself finally, and see yourself through the eyes of compassion like a child, and say, let go. And so for those of you who are doing my soul mending, that's the path where you go into your heart temple and your inner wise woman isn't in there anymore, because you are her. You've fully integrated your inner wise woman. So when at the point of death, your inner wise woman is looking at you, is looking at me, Eartha, the child that's been playing in the realm of the human, and say, just let go now. It's okay. You've done enough. You've done enough. Love yourself. And, you know, these aren't even words. This is a feeling of, okay, it's time. You know, it's time to let go. And that's where the silence of the holy comes in, and the devotion to yourself to live your resurrection all of the time. But again, it's healing all of that fragmentation that we've talked about in the previous thresholds. Like, that's what I learned at Steve's death, was that there was all of these parts of him that needed to be brought to wholeness for us to be able to resolve it at that moment. And I know that there's parts of me that needs to be brought to wholeness as I continue. So for you, Juliet, with your question, how do you embrace yourself as you become elders when the world keeps pushing us not to embrace ourselves as elders, is to, you know, to be devoted to that path of like, you know, I am preparing myself to go, and I'm leaving a legacy, the imprint of what I've given to this world, and to embrace myself through the eyes of God, like to see yourself as a child and to say, enough already, just forgive yourself for the mistakes. Yeah, thank you, Daniela, for turning up. Thank you. I have to go as well. I've got to take on mine to the dentist. So thank you, blessings. So yeah, so all that's doing when we're facing our death is regenerating culture within and bringing it all to consciousness, embracing love, seeing ourselves through our truthful reality every moment. And that means seeing ourselves through a higher state of consciousness. So that's how then we can stay with our beloveds, is because when we see ourselves through the higher state of consciousness, that they are just there. And so 36 scars later, just allowing yourself to feel them completely and to act as if they're still there and to have complete faith that they're right with you. And as soon as you cry, as soon as you let go of your grief and sob on your knees, that they can come close because your light can shine again. So I'm going to leave it there. I think yeah, I might do another one on death, but we have our online course coming up. There's these spaces for concessionary rates because the Sacred Death Centre has got this amazing funding. God bless Lucy at the Sacred Death Centre for managing to get funding for people to be able to access this work. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now so that I can go back to my third dimensional life with my beautiful daughter. And if any questions arise for you from this live, because it will, because there's so much in it for me that I actually need questions because I can just ramble otherwise. So I hope it's answered some of the questions, but if any more questions arise, just put them in the comments of the replay and I will do another live. So sending you loads of love. Thank you for turning up. Thank you for joining me, and I hope it was helpful. Thanks so much, Laura. I am enjoying my third dimension. All right, bye, loves. Thank you so much.